Hello, everyone. I'm Olympia. Thank you for being here with me in this wonderful place called Lights Out Library. And I have a great story to tell you. Recently, I invited you on a space cruise in the solar system, and you have been asking for more of these type of science topics. This time, we will explore the Earth's oceans, down to the abyss. We will encounter many different animals living in the depths of our seas, and different ecosystems too. Tens of thousands of marine species have already been discovered and classified, but perhaps 10 times more exist. In a sense, the ocean floors are as mysterious and hard to access as other parts in the solar system. We will also discuss creatures that became extinct, but once populated our oceans millions of years ago, or even hundreds of millions of years ago. From trilobites and ancient coral reefs to super predators like giant sea scorpions, armored fishes, or the famous Megalodon. But first, I would like to take a few seconds of your time to let you know that we have a Patreon page for those of you who wish to and can support this project. Get more of it and listen ad-free on your favorite podcast app. Patreon is a platform that allows you to contribute directly to our work financially. If you join, you will gain access to various new features. For example, you will have the option to listen to all episodes with or without background sounds and receive regular bonus episodes. We already offer 7 exclusive episodes to our patrons, the latest one of which is about the Palace of Versailles. In addition, you will have the capability to download all these audios to listen offline if you prefer, and participate in selecting future topics. This one was chosen by our patrons. We also offer advance releases and updates on upcoming episodes. We hope to see you there soon so that we can continue developing Lights Out Library, which we enjoy so much. You will find a link in the description box and pinned in the first comment under the video. As always, you do not need to watch the video to follow along. If you fall asleep and wish to resume the video later or jump directly to a particular part of the story, timestamps are also listed in the description and pinned in the first comment, as well as different links to streaming options like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music, which may be better suited for you. We ask that if you can please subscribe to the channel and click on the like button. This does help us promote the channel and eliminate advertisements as much as YouTube allows us to. But before we begin, if you wish to, you may close your eyes and allow yourself to forget about any worries as we embark on this adventure together. Now, assume a comfortable position. Maybe move a little bit to settle. Take a long, deep, relaxing breath. And when you exhale, do it slowly and feel your shoulders drop. Release the tension in your neck. Let your face soften and your jaw relax. And make sure your fingers are not clenched and that your legs are relaxed too. And allow the sound of my voice to guide you through this journey. And now, it's time to explore. As we slowly break the surface and start descending, you may notice something with the light around us. It breaks into separate rays that are visible under the water. This doesn't always happen, It may occur when the surface is undulating a little. It needs to move, but not too much. This makes the surface of the water work like a lens that can concentrate and orient the rays of light. Another condition for us to see the rays is that the water contains particles in suspension that stop some of this light. These can be mineral or organic particles. Depending on depth, there are different environments in our oceans. From the surface to approximately 660 feet, 200 meters, there is the first layer called the photic or epipelagic zone. This region is crucial to life in the seas, and even on the planet, because this is where enough sunlight is available for photosynthesis. This is where the density of plants and animals is the highest, including plankton and floating seaweed, as well as most of the sea creatures we know about: fish, crustaceans, jellyfish, and many more. The layers below often rely on organic nutrients produced in this photic zone. Plankton is the basis of ecosystems in many parts of the ocean. But what is plankton made of, actually? It is a collection of small organisms. Some are plants like algae, and there are bacteria too. Others are bigger animals, like tiny shrimp and the larvae of many species before they have grown enough to swim against the current. These organisms are the basis of the food chain for many larger aquatic animals, from small fishes to giant whales. Plankton is not only crucial as a source of food supporting ecosystems, but it also plays a role in the carbon cycle of the oceans and contributes to regulating our climate. The vegetable part of plankton, the plants, also called phytoplankton, fixes carbon as it grows. The organic matter these algae produce is consumed by animals, both small and big. Ultimately, as organic matter sinks into the ocean due to its density, it transports carbon along with it. This process is why oceans are huge carbon sinks. They help reduce carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and make carbon fall to the oceanic floor, where it remains trapped or serves as food for other ecosystems. It is also believed that oceans are responsible for the oxygenation of our atmosphere. Long ago, the primitive Earth had close to no oxygen in its atmosphere, and many gases that are toxic to forms of life like ours. Over millions of years, billions of small organisms have transformed the atmosphere and created the environment we live in by altering the composition of the air we breathe. Today, it is estimated that about 50% of the world's oxygen is produced by phytoplankton, with the other half coming from land plants. The circulation of organic matter within the oceans is visible underwater, resembling a shower of small white dust. This is called marine snow, which accompanies us as we descend to the ocean floor. Marine snow is composed of organic particles from the upper layers of the sea, descending slowly from the photic zone to the bottom. Some of it is consumed by organisms along the way, but much of it falls to the floor, remaining there or serving as food for filter-feeding animals. During its descent, the flakes may aggregate, forming clumps several centimeters in size, as it can take several weeks to reach the floor. This mechanism transports energy from the sunlit near-surface areas to depths that remain dark, providing a vital food source for creatures in the deep ocean. Before we go deeper, let's take a look at a few wonders that live in the photic or epipelagic zone. We'll examine jellyfish, a coral reef, and sharks. We also discuss their origins, as these creatures are extremely ancient. Additionally, we will briefly explore one of the largest predators that ever lived on Earth, the Megalodon. Jellyfish is the name given to the last phase in the cycle of a creature that has been on our planet for at least 500 million years. It is probably the oldest multi-organ type of animal. There was a time when they were among the most complex forms of life on our planet. Their life cycle begins with the larva, which grows in the water feeding on plankton, of which it is also a part. However, the vast majority of larvae are eaten by other animals before they have a chance to grow. A small fraction of them survive and grow enough to move to the next stage. They settle on a surface and develop into a polyp. Polyps are another form of the same animal, cylindrical with vase-shaped bodies. One end is attached to the surface, and sometimes polyps gather in colonies and attach to one another. The other end has a mouth, surrounded by tentacles that can catch food. Polyps are very similar to other species like corals or sea anemones. These polyps are just a few millimeters long and may stay like this for years before anything else happens. Polyps may start reproduction by budding, meaning that cells in a part of it duplicate and create another individual without any sexual reproduction involved. The most extraordinary stage is when the polyp changes shape again and begins to release segments of its body. Each of these segments will grow into a jellyfish, which is the last stage of the creature. Jellyfish grow quickly by feeding on plankton, and they can practice sexual reproduction. Male and female jellyfish release their eggs and sperm to fertilize them, and the eggs develop into new larvae. The jellyfish stage is just the last shape of the animal and is relatively short. Jellyfish can range from just a fraction of an inch to almost 7 feet, which is just the size of the bell, the central part. Underneath, there are tentacles that can extend further. The largest species is the lion's mane jellyfish, with tentacles that can reach 120 feet, 36 meters. And the Nomura jellyfish, which lives in the waters of Japan, China, and Korea, can weigh up to 200 kilograms, more than 400 pounds, even though it is mostly water. Most species are carnivores, and they hunt passively, with their tentacles serving as drift lines. The tentacles contain venom that kills or stuns prey, which is then slowly brought under the bell to be digested. Jellyfish can also be a source of food for other animals. When they are small, they can be eaten by sea animals and small fish. When they are bigger, they can be eaten by tuna, swordfish, sea turtles, penguins, or sharks. However, they can become invasive when their predators are no longer present. This can happen in the case of overfishing. They multiply and tend to eliminate other species by preying on their eggs, larvae, or juveniles. As we just talked about polyps, let's also take a look at one of the most impressive natural creatures in these low-depth areas, corals. Corals are alive. They are small marine invertebrates that form colonies and, generation after generation, build large mineral skeletons under the sea. Like the polyps that create jellyfish, coral polyps are just a few millimeters in length. They have a mouth with tentacles, and the other end is attached to a hard surface. But they also secrete an exoskeleton made of carbon and calcium that they filter from the water. This is why their colonies, after several generations, build reefs and these characteristic formations underwater. The new polyps grow on the skeletons of their ancestors and keep expanding the colony. An extraordinary thing about most corals is that they live in symbiosis with a plant. Some of them are able to catch small prey, but most of the time they get their energy from their association with a tiny unicellular alga that lives inside their tissues and can practice photosynthesis. This is why the most famous coral formations, like the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia, are close to the surface, typically less than 200 feet, because they need sunlight. But other corals can prey on small animals, and in that case they can develop far deeper and in colder waters, as deep as 10,000 feet for some of them. Colonies can vary widely in color and appearance depending on the coral species and also the conditions. The same species can create different colonies depending on the temperature and the current. Apart from reefs, coral colonies may form atolls and over time create islands in regions where the seabed is not too far from the surface. Their colonies can harbor very diversified ecosystems with thousands of different species of fish, shrimp, or crabs that live in and around the structure. Like jellyfish, corals are extremely ancient life forms on Earth, at least 535 million years old. They appeared in a period called the Cambrian. You know that the history of life on Earth, at least based on what we know about it today, has been characterized by phases of expansion, the appearance of new organisms, and periods of extinction, when a high share of living species has disappeared. The Cambrian period was characterized by a profound change in life on Earth. Prior to it, most life forms were unicellular and relatively simple. Slightly before and during the Cambrian, life diversified quicker than ever, and complex forms of life, bigger and with different organs working together, appeared. For this reason, paleontologists talk of Cambrian explosion to name this period of diversification in life forms. But it all took place in the oceans. There was no vegetation yet on land, and the atmosphere was still relatively poor in oxygen compared with what it has become today. Apart from microbial life in the soil, there were no plants or animals that had started to colonize the land, and yet, oceans were already full of thousands and thousands of different types of plants and animals. One of the predators we can encounter around a coral reef is a shark. Sharks have existed for a very long time. Apart from a few big species, sharks are much less dangerous than their reputation suggests. It is worth examining this large family of fish. Evidence for the existence of sharks appeared in fossils from a period after the Cambrian, called the Ordovician. About 450 to 420 million years ago. Sharks started modestly and were not initially the top predators they later became. They occupied an intermediate place in the food chain and were generally smaller than some of their successors. Modern shark species can be traced back to 100 million years. Sharks do not leave many fossils of their bodies because their skeletons are cartilaginous, not bony, and tend to disappear before they can fossilize unless trapped immediately after death in sediments, which rarely happens. However, they left many fossils of their teeth. Over millions of years, sharks climbed the food chain. Although many remained relatively small, they preyed on very small animals like fish. They also produced super predators that sat at the top of the oceanic food chain for a long time, especially after the extinction of large sea reptiles like mosasaurs. The biggest shark living today is the whale shark, a harmless giant. Whale sharks are the largest fish in the world, reaching lengths of up to 60 feet. They feed only by filtering plankton, like whales. Other more dangerous large sharks include the great white shark, tiger shark, and mako shark. Each is at or near the top of their marine food chain and are preyed upon by almost no other animal, except killer whales. However, most larger sharks are endangered due to human activity. The largest shark ever, the Megalodon, went extinct long ago, about 3 to 4 million years before our time. It was one of the most impressive predators to ever live in our oceans. We think it resembled a larger great white shark, but was longer, much heavier, and had possibly the most powerful bite ever. Megalodons probably diverged from an extinct branch of sharks. We know them mainly through fossil teeth, which suggest a size of up to 60 feet, 18 meters. They likely had a major impact on the food chain, and there could not have been many of them due to their massive food consumption. They probably preyed on large sea animals like whales and seals, like all top predators. Their existence as a species was precarious. This kind of giant predator may be unbeatable, but the survival of the species depends on abundant food availability. In such cases, large prey allowed young megalodons to grow and maintain their mass. If environmental changes such as the cooling or the warming of oceans reduce prey availability, the entire species could be one of the first to disappear. It is believed that a combination of such factors began about 4 million years ago and progressively led to their extinction. Paleontologists also noticed that after megalodons became extinct, the average size of whales grew significantly, which could indicate how their predation affected the ecosystem. But it's been a long time since we started our journey, and we have not even begun to really go deep. So let's continue our descent below the photic zone to a new layer of the water column. We are now entering the Mesopelagic zone, between 700 and 3,000 feet below the surface, which is about 200 to 1,000 meters deep. As you know, as we dive deeper and explore the submarine world, pressure around us increases. This is the single biggest challenge in exploring the ocean's depths. Just a few feet below the surface, the increase in pressure becomes perceptible. The pressure of the air around us at sea level is usually as a unit and is equivalent to 1 atmosphere. When descending deep into the sea, the water applies more pressure as we occupy the space it previously occupied. At about 30 feet, 10 meters below the surface, the pressure is already double what it was before, 2 atmospheres. Additional atmospheres of pressure accumulate as we descend at a rate of 1 additional atmosphere every 30 feet. It is proportional to the depth. This is why most submarines have limits to their range. They cannot go deeper than a few hundred meters generally, because their structure cannot withstand the pressure. Only special submarines designed to resist extreme conditions and constructed from high-resistant materials can descend several miles under the surface. But no worries for us. We are there only in spirit, and pressure cannot affect us. As we enter the Mesopelagic zone, there is still a bit of light, but it is increasingly disappearing. We are now in a twilight zone that becomes more and more dark. Even when we raise our heads, the surface has almost disappeared. Yet marine snow keeps falling around us, and there is still quite a lot of life in this silent world, where only 1% of the sunlight remains. The water becomes much colder as we descend, stabilizing around 37 to 39 degrees Fahrenheit, 3 to 4 degrees Celsius. It remains almost stable at any depth. Where we are now, photosynthesis is impossible or nearly so, and the entire biological community here has adapted to a low light and low food environment. Many organisms live by recycling the organic matter falling from the photic zone. Many creatures spend the night in the upper zone and retreat to the Mesopelagic region during the day to avoid light and visual predators. There is a source of light here, though, coming directly from the inhabitants. It is called bioluminescence. Many animals, including some plankton, like shrimp, have developed the ability to emit light as a means of communication, or to attract prey or discourage predators. The Mesopelagic is predominantly the kingdom of fish. It is estimated that the Mesopelagic fish represent 90 to 95% of the total fish biomass of the planet. Among the most common species here are lanternfish, known for their use of bioluminescence. There are more than 200 species of them. They are small fish, generally 1 to 2 inches long, and they are crucially important to the ecosystem because they serve as basic food for larger organisms. Other species of small fish include bristlemouths, with overdeveloped jaws adapted to their environment, making prey catching more likely in this dark environment. There are also unusual creatures like blobfish. These bottom dwellers live on the seafloor and can live for more than a century. A characteristic of life in the oceans is that the deeper you go, the slower the metabolism becomes due to lower temperatures, higher pressures, and the limited quality of energy available. The reproduction cycle tends to be slower, and individuals live longer. For example, most shrimp in the photic zone have a life expectancy of about 2 years, whereas in the Mesopelagic zone, it is 6 to 8 years. In the lower parts of the Mesopelagic layer, we may encounter a giant squid. These animals are among the largest in our oceans, reaching sizes of up to 13 meters, which is more than 40 feet. Like all squids, a giant squid has a mantle corresponding to its torso, 8 arms, and 2 long tentacles, and their weight is in the hundreds of kilograms. The arms are covered in hundreds of small suction cups that the squid can use to stay attached to prey. Some squids are propelled by pulling water into a cavity inside their mantle and expelling it behind them. Giant squids are predators in this environment. The only threat to them is the sperm whale, which we will see a bit later. Otherwise, they are hunters that prey on every fish of sufficient size. In adaptation to this environment, they have the biggest eyes of any animal on the planet, at least 11 inches in diameter. These giant eyes allow them to detect prey with very little light available. The giant squid's archenemy is the sperm whale, which is probably its only predator as an adult. Sperm whales are mammals and breathe air, so they cannot stay underwater indefinitely. However, they hunt in oceanic depths of more than 2 kilometers, about 1.5 miles below the surface. Their bodies can manage huge variations in pressure and remain without breathing for hours. Their heads, which are block-shaped, represent 1/3 of their entire body. Their ribs are bound to the spine by flexible cartilage, allowing them to reach great depths. The rib cage can collapse and become smaller, rather than snap under pressure. Many sperm whales have superficial lacerations on their skin from fighting with giant squids, and these marks are left by the squid's arms and tentacles. But let's keep diving because the very last traces of sunlight are now disappearing, and we are truly entering the eternal night. From 1/2 mile to 2.5 miles, 1 to 4 kilometers under the surface, we are now in the Bathypelagic or bathyal zone. Before going further down to what is called the abyssal region of the ocean, we're going to take a look around and learn a bit about the history of man-made submarines in humankind's attempts to explore the underwater world. The temperature here has now stabilized around 39 degrees Fahrenheit, wherever we are on the planet, wherever ocean we're in. With the absence of light, there is not a single plant here, and many animals have no eyes because they don't need them. The density of life is also far lower than in the zones above. The fauna looks increasingly different from what we are used to because the conditions are so different. Various kinds of anglerfish are carnivores and have large heads and mouths to catch prey. Their particularity is that they have a lure attached to their heads to attract smaller fish. There are also gulper eels. They have developed giant eyes and have a more compact body than other species of eels. Another common predator is the dragonfish. These are relatively small, 1-foot-long fish with also overdeveloped jaws. Among the few species that have retained functioning eyes is the frilled shark. It is a relatively big shark, 6 feet long, with a large mouth and plenty of small teeth that don't easily let prey escape. They hunt at the bottom of the sea, where the seabed is not too deep. These regions of the ocean were explored for the first time only in the second half of the 20th century because they were previously inaccessible. Actually, the exploration of the deep sea is a recent enterprise. It began around the same time as space exploration. The oceans are, perhaps, still as mysterious and distant as planets in the solar system. We have been able to map them with sonar, but have barely explored them. During antiquity, there had been attempts to measure the depth of the seas in the Mediterranean Sea in particular. But this remained truly mysterious and frightening for the first sailors. For centuries, until modern times and the exploration of the world by navigating the oceans, it was believed that the seas were bottomless, and no rope was long enough to reach the seafloor. In the 16th century, for example, Magellan, the first navigator to complete a journey around the globe, tried to measure the ocean's depth by using various ropes with heavy ballasts in the Atlantic Ocean between Africa and South America. The entire sounding line was 2,500 feet long, 800 meters, but it was far too short to reach the bottom. The depth he tried to measure was actually a little over 3 miles, 5,000 meters. However, navigation and naval combat development were incentives to devise means of diving, even for just a few meters below the surface. Various systems were created in the following centuries. These included archaic diving bells, which had been used during antiquity in coastal waters, and waterproof suits, the ancestors of modern diving suits. One experimental bell, made of wood and lead with barrels of air for divers to breathe, was imagined by Edmund Halley, same Halley who gave his name to Halley's Comet. He created this bell at the end of the 17th century, but it was difficult to use and could not operate below a few dozen meters. In the 18th and 19th centuries, naturalists attempted to explore and discover life forms under the surface, noting that the density of animals decreased as depth increased. By extrapolating this decrease, they theorized that all life disappeared below 1,500 feet, about 500 meters, which we now know is not the case. This assumption was quickly challenged by the mid-19th century, thanks to the first underwater telegraphic cables. When these cables were brought back to the surface for repairs in the 1860s, they returned from depths of more than 5,000 feet, covered in animals like clams and worms. These discoveries sparked much greater interest in deep sea exploration. An expedition by a scientific vessel, the HMS Challenger, in the 1870s, revealed that life existed at depths of more than 3 miles below the surface. The first functioning submarines, generally designed as warships, appeared in the late 19th century and multiplied during the First World War. However, they could not reach depths of more than a few dozen yards below the surface and did not provide much information about marine life. In the interwar period of the 1930s, the ancestor of modern deep-sea exploration submersibles was built. It was called the bathysphere. It was a spherical steel submersible attached to a cable and a ship at the surface. It was unpowered and simply lowered into the ocean on its cable. The bathysphere broke several consecutive depth records, reaching 3,000 feet, just at the limit of the bathyal zone, in 1934. For the first time, it was possible to observe marine life in its environment and discover entirely new species at depths that had not been reached before. After the Second World War, exploration resumed, and this record was broken with another sphere, the Bentos Cup, in 1949. But the big challenge to truly explore the depths of the oceans was to create a submarine that could move independently without being attached to a cable and a surface ship. This was achieved in the 1950s with the FNRS-3, a compact submarine designed for scientific research. The FNRS-3 reached 4,000 meters, 2.5 miles, in 1953. Later, another design, the Trieste, broke all records by reaching the bottom of the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench in the Pacific, 11 kilometers under the surface, more than 35,000 feet. This was at the end of the 1950s. These innovations in submarines allowed us to discover that not only did life exist several miles under the surface, but entirely new ecosystems could develop at this depth without any light and under extreme pressure. Let's continue descending. We are now entering the Abyssal zone, 10,000 to 20,000 feet deep. Despite how dark and mysterious this place is, it is gigantic on the scale of our planet. It covers 60% of the Earth's surface and more than 80% of the water in our oceans. In fact, if a completely different form of life, not made to live in a gas atmosphere, were to reach our planet from outer space, this may be where they would start searching for life and exploring, as it is larger than any environment close to the surface. The water here no longer contains oxygen, making it impossible for marine creatures to breathe as they do near to the surface. This is a major restriction on the forms of life that evolve at such depths. Every organism living in this region cannot rely on plants and herbivores as the basis of their ecosystem. They depend entirely on organic material falling from above, the marine snow that accompanies us as we continue descending, or they must feed on each other. Sometimes they can live off sources of energy and chemicals from the planet's crust, such as hydrothermal vents, which we will see in a moment. Organic material is not only marine snow. It can also be the entire body of a large animal, like a whale, which sinks when it dies. From the death of a single animal, an entire ecosystem can appear and last for several decades, miles under the surface. The body of a single whale will be decomposed by bacteria. Larger creatures like shrimp or crabs, adapted to life at such depth, can feed on the body and support bigger predators before the entire whale has disappeared. A food chain that sustains thousands of smaller animals flourishes thanks to these nutrients. As in the bathyal zone, everything is even slower here. Animals move very slowly with a slower metabolism. They live longer, and their organisms are adapted to conserve energy as much as possible because it is scarce. Their bodies have no internal air spaces like swim bladders. Fish and other animals closer to the surface have air inside their systems, which helps them dive or return to the surface. This is impossible here due to the pressure that would crush them. So they need to have bodies under the same pressure as the environment, which means no cavities inside. There is no sunlight, but many species are still bioluminescent. Biologists estimate that up to 90% of species living in the abyssal zone are bioluminescent. Despite all the hardships, plenty of families of organisms are present here. There are shrimps and crabs, mollusks and squids, different classes of fish, and probably many others that have not yet been discovered. As I mentioned, all resources do not come from above. In some parts of the abyssal plain, there are unusual but well-identified wells of chemicals and energy that can sustain life. One of them is the cold seep or cold vent. These may appear when hydrocarbons like oil or gas have been trapped under the seabed. When there is a leak, these chemicals, along with a bit of heat, are released into the water. This affects the topography. The reaction between methane and seawater may create rock formations and reefs, and on these formations, an entire ecosystem may appear, feeding on the chemicals and recycling the released energy. It all begins with bacteria that can metabolize methane for energy without any air or other sources of nutrition. These bacteria may feed symbiotically with colonies of mussels and tube worms. The bacteria provide the worm with energy, synthesized from hydrogen sulfide, and the tube worm provides the bacteria with the hydrogen sulfide it needs by mining it through a root system that keeps the worm attached to the substrate. Mussels form beds, and tube worms may form entire bushes that can contain hundreds of individuals and rise 1 yard above the ground. Cold seeps are not eternal. They appear when a leak occurs due to tectonic activity. When the leak stops because the reserves of hydrocarbons are exhausted, the organisms start to disappear. These ecosystems can last for centuries before this happens, but they are relatively short-lived. Another source of life can be hydrothermal vents. There are no hydrocarbons involved here. These are fissures on the seafloor from which heated water issues. It is heated by geothermal activity. These vents are found around places of underwater volcanic activity due to plate tectonics. So they are frequent along the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and the East Pacific Ridge. Seawater is drawn under the surface through a fissure or porous sediments, heated beneath the seabed, and emerges elsewhere at a higher temperature. It is enriched with chemicals from beneath the ground. The water temperature may range from 140 degrees Fahrenheit to as high as 800 degrees Fahrenheit. The minerals it contains may solidify and build chimneys up to 200 feet high on the seafloor. They constantly emit a white or black cloud of hot water mixed with minerals. There can be sulfur, iron, calcium, silicon. Similar to cold seeps, life around the vents begins with bacteria that can synthesize the dissolved minerals. A thick bed of bacteria forms the foundation of a food chain. Smaller crustaceans feed on the bacteria and become food for snails or other mollusks, crabs, shrimps, and worms. This is uncertain and remains theoretical, but the oldest forms of life on Earth could have appeared around these vents. Fossilized microorganisms that lived more than 4 billion years ago near hydrothermal vents were discovered a few years ago in Canada. This would have been just shortly after the formation of the oceans, which is estimated to have happened about 4.4 billion years ago, and not that long after the formation of the Earth itself, 4.5 billion years ago. As I already mentioned before, the dominant theory about the appearance of life is that it came from the oceans. And for most part of the planet's existence, it remained limited to them. There were no plants or animals on the Earth's surface until a few 100 million years ago. During the pre-Cambrian and the Cambrian ages, complex forms of life multiplied in the oceans with various specialized organs, senses, and ecological niches for each species. At the top of these new ecosystems, larger creatures appeared and disappeared over hundreds of millions of years. Let's look at the most impressive predators that inhabited our planet, known to us thanks to the fossils they left behind. One of the most ancient creatures that appeared during the Cambrian era is the trilobite. For about 250 million years until they became extinct, they were one of the most common life forms in the ocean. They were arthropods that came in many different sizes and shapes. However, they all had a segmented exoskeleton that made them resemble giant woodlice. They were predators, scavengers, or filter feeders, feeding on plankton. They were one of nature's first large attempts at relatively large and complex arthropods. In their modern form, marine arthropods include crabs, lobsters, and prawns. The first ever apex predator identified so far is called anomalocaris, which also lived during the Cambrian. It was gigantic for its time at 3.2 feet, about a meter, in length, and had highly developed eyes that could have been useful for hunting prey. It moved by undulating in the water. During the Ordovician that followed the Cambrian, the ocean food chain was dominated by sea scorpions. These arthropods commonly measured more than 3 feet, with the largest of them, and probably the largest arthropod that ever lived, reaching about 3 meters long, or about 10 feet. However, the biggest creature we know of from the Ordovician is a giant cephalopod called Orthoceras, which had an 11-meter, about 30 feet, elongated shell. Advancing tens of millions of years to the Devonian, also called the Age of Fishes, about 400 million years ago, the new largest predators were armored fish, like the biggest of them, Dunkleosteus. When they disappeared, they were probably the deadliest predators the Earth had ever seen. They were giant fish, 20 feet long and 1 ton heavy, with sharp, bony plates at the front of the mouth that worked like a sharp beak. These fishes are called placoderms because their head and upper parts of the body were covered in armored plates. When the placoderms became extinct, in the Carboniferous period, sharks moved up the food chain and occupied the spaces left by Dunkleosteus and other large fish. About 250 million years ago, the decline of marine reptiles in the oceans began. Some, like the Nothosaurus, may have lived like seals today, catching food and water but residing on rocks and beaches. By the end of the Triassic period, 200 million years ago, large plesiosaurs, which could be up to 50 feet long, became the rulers of the oceans for more than 100 million years, although their dominance was challenged by sharks. Fossils of plesiosaurs showing shark bites have been found. Some had long necks, while others resembled crocodiles with short, thick necks and extraordinarily powerful jaws. Other extinct marine reptiles from the same period, starting 250 million years ago, include ichthyosaurs, literally fish lizards. They looked more like fish but were giant reptiles adapted to marine life. The largest ichthyosaurus species could compete in size and weight with plesiosaurs. These creatures dominated the seas when dinosaurs walked the land during the Jurassic period. In the Cretaceous period, which followed the Jurassic, About 155 to 66 million years ago, mosasaurs appeared. Their decline allowed for the emergence of the Megalodon, along with other sharks. Today's apex predators in our oceans include sharks and orcas, or killer whales. However, their existence is threatened by human activity. Humanity is the one species capable of dominating and potentially destroying every ecosystem, whether intentionally or not. We are now more than 4 miles or 6 kilometers below the surface. In many parts of the planet, that would be enough to reach the ocean floor, but not everywhere. Oceans can be as deep as 6.8 miles, 11 kilometers. There are trenches in the ocean, mainly in the Pacific, that are almost twice as deep as the Abyssal zone. These regions are called Hadal, named after the Greek god of the underworld, Hades. We know there are living communities there that probably originated from the abyssal plains and adapted to even deeper levels. However, these ocean regions remain almost unexplored. They have been mapped with sonar, and some have been visited once or twice by deep submersibles. Still, we have very few samples of the creatures living there, and the species may be quite different from one trench to another, given that they have remained separated for millions of years. It is estimated that it is impossible for vertebrate organisms with an inner skeleton to live below 8,000 meters because of the pressure. However, some invertebrates can. These regions are so deep that they have not changed in conditions for over hundreds of millions of years. Their depth can change due to plate tectonics, and maybe they will be reabsorbed into the Earth's crust or emerge in the future. For now, the environment at this depth is incredibly stable and constant. The temperatures of the water never change. It remains slightly above 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius. There is never any light and barely any noise. Everything is extremely slow under such extreme pressure. Perhaps some of the first forms of life that appeared on Earth are still hidden down there, unchanged because their environment has remained constant over hundreds of millions of years. They may be ready to serve as the matrix for life to colonize the Earth again one day, in case it disappears from the surface and upper layers of the seas. We've come to the end of our little journey tonight. I hope you enjoyed this adventure, and I invite you to discover and learn more. Now you can let go and sleep. Or if you're not ready to sleep yet, you may pick another story from my ever-growing library. And until we meet again, good night. Sleep well.